Once upon a time, there was a humble old miller with 3 sons, a mill, a donkey, and a cat. That was all he had in the whole world. But it was all right because he earned a living from his mill and donkey, and the cat kept the mill free of mice. But when the poor miller died, he left the mill to his eldest son, the donkey to the middle son, and the youngest son received the cat. The youngest son felt cheated by his share. "What good will a cat do me if I am too poor to even be bothered by mice?" he said to himself. "I might as well sell him and buy myself one meal with the money." The cat did not like the idea of a new master, so he stood up and spoke. "Master," he said, "do not despair. If you have a pair of boots made for me, and a sack as well, I will prove myself much more useful than you imagine." The miller's son decided that any other way he chose to spend his few coins, he would end up a beggar. At least this way he had a chance to be greatly rewarded. And so he had boots made for the cat, and brought him an extra-large drawstring sack. "These will do nicely," said the cat, and he thanked his master, put on his boots, threw the bag over his shoulder, and ran off to a grassy hill where a great many rabbits dwelt. Puss in Boots sat up in the warren with his sack, and put into it some tender lettuce leaves and some parsley, and waited for some thoughtless rabbit to come into the sack and feast on the rabbit delicacies. Soon enough, 2 foolish rabbits did come into the sack, and they started to eat. Puss in Boots drew the string of the sack up tight so they would not escape, and headed off to see the king.
Who's the king?
We'll find out. Puss in Boots came to the palace where the king and his beautiful daughter lived, and he requested an audience. When Puss met the king, he bowed deeply, and he presented his game to the king. "Your Majesty," he greeted, "I have fetched for you 2 rabbits from the warren of my honorable lord, the Marquis of Carabas," the title Puss gave to his master, "which he charged me to present to your Majesty with his compliments." The king was greatly amused by the smartly dressed Puss, because he had those nice boots, and the gift of game pleased him. And so Puss in Boots kept up presenting his Majesty with all manner of game for a few months, until he was sure that the king had a high opinion of his master. One day soon after, Puss told his master his plan. "If you swim in the river at the exact spot that I tell you, your fortune will be made." The miller's son did as Puss advised, and when he was in the river, Puss stole away his clothes and hid them under a stone. And it was not long after that the king and his lovely princess was passing by in his golden coach, checking up on the countryside. Puss in Boots ran up to the coach and cried out, "Help! Help! My master, the Marquis, is drowning!" The king ordered his attendants to rescue him. As they did, Puss in Boots told the king that robbers had stolen the Marquis's clothes and thrown him in the river, so the king gave the Marquis a suit of fine clothes. Once he was dressed, the Marquis of Carabas looked quite handsome, and the princess thought him a very pleasant young man indeed. The king had the Marquis of Carabas ride with him and the princess through the countryside, and Puss, quite excitedly, ran ahead of the coach till he came upon workers in a field.
Meow.
Are you Puss in Boots?
Uh-huh.
I see. The field belonged to a terrible ogre that also owned many other fields and a grand palace. Puss in Boots said to these workers, "You must tell the king that this field belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, or you will be chopped into mincemeat."
Who said?
Puss said that. The workers were startled by the brazen cat and agreed. When the king asked them to whom the field belonged, they all said, "To the Marquis of Carabas." And it was the same for all the fields the king passed. Was that true?
Yep.
No, it's not really his. Because the cat frightened all the people. He said, "You'll be made into mincemeat if you do not say that the fields belong to the Marquis of Carabas." So they're doing so. Because no one wants to be made into mincemeat.
I do.
You want to be made into a meat pie?
Do you want to be chopped up into little bits? I don't think so.
Puss had finally made his way all the way to the palace of the ogre. The ogre was quite interested in the smartly dressed pussy cat, and he received Puss as civilly as an ogre could. The ogre led him into the castle, and Puss said to the ogre, "I have heard, your greatness, that you have the power to transform into any mighty animal that you wish, say a lion or an elephant." The ogre was very proud and said to Puss in Boots, "Of course I can." And with that he changed into a fearsome lion that gave a mighty roar. Puss in Boots was startled by this and leapt right up to the roof. When Puss regained his courage, he climbed carefully down. His boots were not made for climbing on roof tiles, you see, and went back to the ogre, who was laughing heartily at the silly, scaredy cat. Puss in Boots was slightly embarrassed, but he said to the ogre, "That was certainly impressive, but I have also heard that it is indeed possible for you to become a very small animal. Say, a mouse?" "I think you can, but I'd have to see it to believe it." The indignant ogre was surprised that anyone would question his power. "Impossible!" he growled. "Watch this." And with that he instantly became a tiny little mouse. But no sooner had he done so than Puss pounced upon him and ate him up before he could change back into a horrible ogre. He ate him up.
Why? Why?
What do you think?
Because he was evil.
Because he was evil, and I think he wanted his castle, too, to give to his master, the Marquis of Carabas. The king's carriage soon came near the palace formerly belonging to the ogre. Puss in Boots went out to greet the king and invite him into the palace, addressing the Marquis of Carabas as the owner. The Marquis of Carabas took the princess on his arm and led her inside to a grand feast set out for the ogre, of fine cakes and delicacies. What kind of delicacies do you think there were?
Cupcakes.
In my head.
Your head? I don't think that would be very good. What would you like to eat if you were going to a feast in a castle?
Steak. I would like
person.
steak.
You would eat a person? You're a cannibal? I'm doing something wrong with this child.
Yes, you are.
I'm not eat you no matter what.
Don't eat me, please.
I want to eat Jessica.
Don't eat Jessica either. The king was very mightily impressed by this time. And after the banquet, he said to the Marquis of Carabas, "My good sir, it will be your own fault if you do not soon become my son-in-law." The king was right, for after a short courtship, the Marie of Carabas and the princess were married in a grand ceremony. And Puss in Boots lived the rest of his days in great comfort, and only ever chased mice for sport, now and then. For his master never forgot the tribute paid to him by his cat, and so they all lived happily ever after. Thus ends Puss in Boots.